Nothing says Apple like a sleek design, metal edges and thin bezels, and while the iPhone 5S has all of those. Okay, maybe I lied, it doesn't have thin bezels, but for a phone released almost 9 years ago, it does look pretty good. The 5S, released in late 2013, was the cutting edge of consumer technology and introduced many features that are still on phones today. As I'm sure it was for a lot of you, this was my first ever iPhone. It changed the way I viewed technology and introduced me to social media. It will always have a soft spot in my heart, but is it still useful in 2021? At one point in time, this would have burned a hole in your pocket, but now it can be found on eBay for around £30. For the price of a decent takeaway, you get a very nice looking phone, similar to that of the iPhone 12 Pro with its flat edges. Taking a closer look at the edges, at the top there's a power button, on the left side there's some volume buttons and a mute switch, and on the bottom there's a speaker and a lightning port. The first thing I noticed when going back to this phone was just how light it is. It literally feels like a toy compared to one of the newer phones. The battery in this phone was terrible, so I ordered a new one and replaced it the next day, which was a harder process than I'd hoped for. I then reassembled the device and hoped that it would turn on, and thankfully it did. Because of the phone's small form factor, you can't really fit a bigger battery in it, so the battery life is still pretty bad. It has a 4-inch Retina LCD panel with a pretty strange resolution, which is just under HD. This makes consuming content on the device less appealing, but because of that small screen, it doesn't seem too bad. The thing that lets it down the most is those speakers. The 5S does have something to combat those horrible speakers though, and that is a headphone jack. Having actual ports on a device is always better than carrying around dongles. The iPhone 5S introduced Touch ID, which is something I want Apple to bring back. It was implemented on the iconic home button. I really like Face ID, but having that extra option to unlock your phone is very nice. The iPhone 5S was the first consumer smartphone to introduce a 64-bit processor. This allowed it to play better games and be faster than its competition and the previous Model 5. 8 years later, this processor still performs surprisingly well, navigating through the phone with ease. I'll be honest, it isn't the snappiest. There are a few hiccups and a bit of lag every now and again, and apps do take a few more seconds to open, but it does run surprisingly well for how old the phone is. Along with the A7 processor, the phone came with 1GB of RAM and came in 3 storage options: 16, 32 or 64GB models. It received 6 major iOS updates from iOS 7 to iOS 12. Apple did sadly drop support for it, meaning it doesn't have any of the newer widgets or customization that came with iOS 14, and at times you have to download older versions of apps. The phone doesn't have any sort of waterproofing at all. That's never been an issue for me though, and I have used it in damp and rainy conditions multiple times. The iPhone 5S has 2 cameras, a front-facing 1.2 megapixel sensor that can take some pretty bad looking photos and record video at 720p. The rear-facing camera has an 8 megapixel sensor that can actually take some decent looking photos, especially when the subject is close. Images can appear overexposed and colours aren't too accurate. Low light photography is one of its weak spots. The images come out noisy and the shutter speed is pretty slow. It can record 1080p at 30fps, which is pretty decent for a 2013 smartphone. It can also capture slow motion at 120fps 720p. I think the video is good, but the audio lets it down. Even though the phone has multiple microphones, it only uses one to capture audio when recording. I'll very briefly talk about gaming. Simple games on the 5S run pretty well, but when you move on to more intensive games, you might struggle a bit or they might not install at all. But for a phone of this age, it is really good, and I'd be surprised if you could find a competitor's phone that can still perform this well. Moving on to some things that aren't too good about the device. There are many features this iPhone doesn't offer, and if I could drag just one from the newer phones and put it into this, apart from the battery, it would be Apple Pay. It's something that I rely on so much that I can't remember the last time I actually used a card to pay for something. This has been a great device. Apple did a really good job designing it, and an even better one keeping it up to date, far longer than anyone would have thought. It's really good if you're just going to make a couple of phone calls a day and a few texts, but that's it. The brutally honest answer, for the average person, this phone just isn't worth using anymore. Its aging processor and small battery just aren't going to hold up in today's usage. And because of its older software, more and more apps are going to stop supporting this device. So if you need an app for work, there's a chance it won't be supported on iOS 12 anymore. This will always be one of my favourite iPhones, and if you're watching this, it's probably one of yours too. Drop a comment telling me your favourite thing about the iPhone 5S. If you've made it this far into the video, thank you very much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Please like and subscribe and check out my channel for more tech related content, and enjoy the rest of your day.